Trade talks resume between the US and EU to create the world's largest free trade agreement, but Europe won't pander to German demands to include a data protection clause in the deal. And it's the world's biggest online shopping bonanza. Cyber Monday in China could reap sales of nearly $5 billion. Hello and a very warm welcome. You're with World Business Report. I'm Sally BUNDOCK. Also in the programme, as China's leaders meet to discuss economic policy, we focus on its poorest region and what difference their decisions will actually make. But first of all, it's poised to be the biggest free trade deal in history. Today, the second round of talks resume between the United States and the European Union to attempt to agree on what's known as a transatlantic trade and investment partnership. The talks, which are expected to last a week, were postponed due to the US government shutdown. Now, officials are aiming to have a deal signed by the end of this year, which would create a market of 800 million people. Already, together, the US and the EU account for around $30 trillion of annual output, almost half the world's total. And it's estimated that greater free trade between them has the potential to boost economic growth by $100 billion per year in reduced tariffs. However, the talks have been overshadowed by the recent leak that America's security agency has been tapping German Chancellor Angela Merkel's mobile phone. The allegation resulted in Germany pushing to include data protection rules in these talks, but EU officials in Brussels have denied this will happen. Well, I'm joined by Holger Schmieding, Chief Economist at Berenberg Bank, to talk through the issues. Lovely to see you, Holger, this morning. So, politics always features heavily in trade discussions, and these talks this week were probably going to be made that much more difficult because of the spying story emanating from the United States regarding Angela Merkel and other EU leaders, I might add. What do you think of Germany's move to try and include this data protection clause in these talks?
I think the data protection issue should be left aside. There should be separate negotiations between Europe and the US. They should not be tied to the trade talks. Having said that, judging the political mood on the European continent especially, to get a trade deal ratified, we will probably have to see some data protection agreement between the US and the EU at the same time. But these are separate issues. They should not be tied up into one negotiation. There's a lot of difficult stuff to be talked about in the trade negotiations already.
Now, while we're talking of pointing fingers, the US is accusing Germany of drowning out competition in Europe with its strong exports, a sort of beggar thy neighbour policy. Tell us more about that and how that could affect these talks this week.
Well, there is a lot of discussion at the moment, yes, between the US and actually some European countries on the one hand and Germany on the other hand about the German trade surplus. But we are now here in the stage of trade talks. German exports are a great contribution to global trade. Germany is a competitive country. What other parts of Europe need to be? They need to be more competitive. They're trying to get there. And if we look at the latest data, we actually see that the German trade surplus with the rest of the Eurozone has come down sharply. Germany is rebalancing in the world. But it's, of course, the massive flood of money from the US and the resulting boom in US housing, which we have at the moment, which sucks in German imports into the US. So the German strength at the moment is relative to the US, which is largely a US doing because they have a strongly growing economy. The German strength is no longer relative to the rest of Europe.
And when we look at the fact that we've got a week ahead of us of trade talks and they're hoping to have some kind of deal in place by the end of the year, how optimistic are you? Because these talks are riddled with all sorts of issues that could create problematic hurdles.
I'm optimistic by nature, but this is a very, very ambitious target to get the trade talks concluded by the end of this year. I hope they can do it, but chances are that we will hit a few roadblocks on the way.
And what are they likely to be? Very briefly, the roadblocks, do you think?
It's actually in the trade talks, there are issues of deregulation when it comes to services. Can the US financial firms, for instance, trade freely in Europe or in everything? It's genetically modified food. It's going to be these tough, often consumer protection issues.
All right, Holger Schmieding, always good to have you on the programme. Thank you for your thoughts on that. And of course, here we will keep you up to date as the week progresses on how those trade talks are going. But first of all, let's now move on, because tens of millions of Chinese internet users stayed up on Sunday night to shop for bargains at midnight when online retailers slashed prices by at least 50%. It's become the biggest day of the year for Chinese consumers. Last year, the Alibaba Group accounted for $3.1 billion worth of transactions, far surpassing big shopping days in the US or Europe. Our Hong Kong correspondent Juliana Liu has more.
No, this isn't the latest animated children's game. It's a promotion for China's version of Cyber Monday. Retailers here on Alibaba's Tmall compete against each other, promising savings of at least 50%. ODM is a Hong Kong watchmaker with a virtual shop on Tmall. The company has long had a physical presence, but now it's betting big on the internet. It expects to sell more watches on Monday than it normally sells in 2 months.
In China, online shopping is more popular than normal shopping. Customers have become used to buying in this way and they much prefer it. The entire online shopping experience is so convenient, it's no wonder people choose to shop online.
The biggest winner on the day is likely to be Alibaba, the internet giant that started this sales event just 4 years ago. It has boosted its network capacity to cope with the extra demand.
It's about 2.5 times what we prepared last year. So I think we're very well prepared this year for the surge in traffic. Last year, in the first minute alone, we got 10 million unique visitors to Taobao and Tmall.
Well, to find out exactly how keen Chinese shoppers are to open their wallets online, we've come to Causeway Bay, one of Hong Kong's best-known retail areas, where it seems everything is for sale.
I plan to buy shoes and handbags. A lot of the big brands are selling on Tmall. It's all very cheap, much cheaper than normal. It's great.
No, there is nothing there that I want. My friends have told me that it's a real fight to get the good stuff. If you want it, you have to wait by the computer and constantly refresh the page to order. You have to be so fast, so I don't think it's worth it.
The sale is likely to be worth it to tens and possibly hundreds of millions of online shoppers who will be using their smartphones and computers to ring up another record year on China's Cyber Monday. Juliana Liu, BBC News, Hong Kong.
Sounds really hectic, doesn't it? Let's stay with China, because strong economic data over the weekend will offer some confidence to the country's leaders who are currently meeting to determine changes to policy for the coming decade. Industrial production data beat expectations whilst inflation came in lower than forecast. It's the third and penultimate day of the plenum at which the Chinese government is sounding the horn to comprehensively deepen reform. That's the line, according to the People's Daily, which is the Communist Party's mouthpiece. Let's speak to our correspondent in China, Martin Patience, who's in Henan province, one of the country's poorest regions. Good to see you, Martin. Before we talk about what impact the region you're in will feel as a consequence of these talks, just tell us if there's any news out of this gathering of the leaders.
Well, this hugely important meeting is taking place in Beijing, about a 10-hour drive from where I am. Now, all the delegates, 400 or so, are meeting in that hotel, and according to some reports, they're not actually allowed to leave the hotel to prevent leaks. But certainly in the Chinese state media, some details have been emerging. For example, today we heard some of the scope of the possible reforms to state-owned enterprises in China. Now, there's been a lot of criticism from business people in China that say actually the private sector has to have a greater say, and certainly in the China Daily there was an indication that perhaps private investors would be able to buy stakes in those companies, and that will be welcomed by economic liberals who are calling for greater reform.
All right, Martin, thanks very much. I'm told we're tight for time, so I can't question you further, but we'll be hearing from Martin throughout the day as he analyses what the discussions going on in Beijing really mean for areas like Henan in China, which is one of the poorest provinces there. That's something we'll discuss in more detail. And of course, there's a lot more online for you to read as well, BBC Online. But I just want to show you the markets. It's a mixed picture, actually, but you can see Japan standing out. The yen's weakened. The strong jobs news out in the States on Friday has boosted optimism. There'll be demand for goods made in Asia in the US. I'll see you soon as we look through the papers.